Chapter 7, Back on the Farm, Part 1, Tuesday, April 19th, 1870. Will enjoyed working outdoors with his father, young Jim, Adudu, White Cloud, and Aunt Lynetta, who worked alongside the men. The process of growing crops involved a lot of work, starting with the preparation of the land. They had to work up the ground with a plow to loosen it up enough so when the seeds were planted they could take root. The earliest plows were forked sticks and timbers which could be tied to horses or oxen to pull it. A major advancement to the plow was an invention of a blade which was self-polishing and combined into one piece. This invention was by a blacksmith from the same state of Vermont where Uncle Samuel Bass was born. The blacksmith's name was John Deere, and he opened up a factory in Moline, Illinois in 1847. When Will's father was young, he told his sons he used to plant the seeds by hand. He said he would just throw the seeds and let them grow wherever they landed, which was called broadcasting the seeds. This method of planting made it much more difficult to weed and harvest the crop. Will and his family used a dibber to plant their seeds, which was a board with holes evenly spread apart. A stick would be pushed through the holes, and then a seed would be placed in the hole made by the stick. This was a very hard job and took a lot of time, but made weeding and harvesting a lot easier. Will also spent more and more time with his mother Kazar. After supper she would wash the dishes and he would dry them while they talked. "I'm looking forward to my next visit to Ypsilanti," Will said. "Hey, why don't you come with me, Mama? You will get to ride for free in the cookie car and meet my good friend Cookie." "If I can't get there in a horse and buggy, I guess I won't be going," Kazar said. "I'm not riding inside some iron horse." "But, Mama, you will love the ride while watching the countryside go by so fast." "Why would I want to see the countryside go by so fast? I'd rather go slowly and have time to appreciate it," Kazar replied indignantly. "But Aunt Margaret and Uncle Sam would love to see you. Every time I go there they want to know when am I going to bring you with me," Will said, still trying to persuade his mother. Kazar never said anything. She had made up her mind, although she had to admit it would be nice to see Aunt Margaret. Whenever they got together, the two of them would laugh and visit late into the night. Will knew his mother was finished talking about the subject. To hide his disappointment, he said, "We planted a lot of corn today. I think we may have put in 2 acres or more." "That's great," Kazar said. "It sounds like we are going to have a prosperous year." Friday morning at 4 a.m., Will rode out of bed, washed up, and joined the rest of the family for breakfast. His sisters Parthena and Sarah were sitting at the table, hardly able to hold their heads up because they were so sleepy. Before going to school, gathering the eggs was part of their morning chores, along with filling the wood box for the cooking stove. Will came up behind his mother, who was standing in front of the stove. "Good morning, beautiful," he told her as he kissed her on the back of the neck. "Hey, Pa, you ready to finish planting the corn this morning?" Henry was sitting at the end of the table sipping his morning coffee. He could tell when it was Friday because Will was always so anxious to get the work done. Mr. Elliott held his barn dances on Friday night, and people from miles around came, and it was always a fun community affair. Henry had to admit he looked forward to the dance himself because it was when he could sit around with the other farmers to catch up on the latest news. This was also the time when he could dance with his beautiful wife Kazar. "You riding with the family to Elliott's barn dance tonight?" his father asked. "No, I'm going to be leaving earlier because little Carl Baker wants to go by the McKays to look at a horse he's interested in buying," his son replied. Henry didn't understand why they called Carl little because at 24 he was a man. "Yes, I heard the McKays had some new young horses to sell. In fact, I was thinking of going over one day and looking at them myself. While you are there, see if there's a good horse to help us around the farm," his father said. The 5 of them finished their breakfast, then Will and his father went out to join Aunt Lynetta, young Jim, and his Adudu, who were already in the fields. They completed the planting by early afternoon, and so Will went home to get ready for the dance. He was surprised when little Carl came to pick him up in his brand new buckboard wagon which he had built himself. "Wow," Will said, rubbing his hands over the sides as they walked around the wagon. "This is one of the finest wagons in the settlement. You did a great job. Congratulations, little Carl." "Thanks. I just finished it a couple of days ago. This is why I'm looking for another horse. Old Bess here is getting old, so I want to just put her in the pasture to enjoy her remaining years." Will jumped up in the seat beside his friend and said, "Looks like we will be going to the barn dance in style tonight." Little Carl and Will rode off in the new wagon, talking about the Elliott barn dance as they headed to the McKay farm. Little Carl said he just hoped Lynn Taylor would be there because tonight he was going to finally ask her out on a date. When they arrived at the farm, Malcolm McKay was in the corral with 4 horses. He was brushing one of them when they pulled up beside the fence. Little Carl jumped down and approached the gate. "Good afternoon, Mr. McKay. I see you're getting the horse I'm interested in all cleaned up for me." "Hello, Little Carl. Yep. This horse here is a beauty. I'm sure she will be perfect for you." Mr. McKay was right. The horse was a beautiful golden color with a long flowing ivory-colored mane and tail. She reminded Will of the team of horses High Barbary and Arabian, which were owned by Mr. Levi Foster, who Will had worked for in Amherstburg. This type of horse is called a palomino that many people believe came from Spain. The word palomino is a Spanish surname which is a Latin word meaning pale dove. Queen Isabella of Spain, who financed Christopher Columbus's voyages to the New World, sent a palomino stallion and 5 mares to New Spain, which is now Mexico. They eventually spread north into Texas, California, and other parts of North America. It was rare to find one, and Little Carl was lucky to have this opportunity to buy such a horse. Little Carl and Mr. McKay began bargaining a price, and when they agreed on the cost, they went into the house to sign the ownership papers. Will remained outside and stood on the corral fence looking at the other 3 horses to see if there was one his father may be interested in. After seeing the horse Little Carl was buying, the other 3 didn't seem to be as nice. Just then Mr. McKay and Little Carl came out of the house. After they shook hands on the porch, Little Carl ran over to Will. "Well, it looks like I've got me a new horse. Mr. McKay says she has not been broken yet, so she can't be ridden or harnessed to a wagon, but he says I'm welcome to come over any time and work with her in the corral. In the meantime, she's going to stay here. This will also give me a chance to come up with a name." "A good name for your new horse would be Beauty," Will said, "because she is one of the most beautiful horses I've ever seen." "That's a perfect name. Come, Beauty," Little Carl called out to his new horse. Beauty just raised her head and looked at them as she scratched her hoof into the ground. On the way to the barn dance, Will had never seen Little Carl this excited about anything since he graduated from school. During the ride to the dance, all he could talk about was how much fun he was going to have with his new wagon and new horse. When they arrived to the dance, Little Carl was finally able to get his mind off his new purchase. Elliott's barn was already full of neighbors enjoying the event. Some of the children were sitting in the hayloft and on the beams above, watching the adults dancing below. Other children were outside running around playing tag and various games. Will and Little Carl made their way over to one side of the dance floor where most of the young bachelors had gathered. "Hi, Will. Hi, Little Carl," one of the boys said. "Hello," the 2 said as they shook hands with all the other boys. "Guess what I just bought," Little Carl said proudly. "A horse for Mr. McKay to pull my new wagon." "You didn't buy that new golden beauty of his, did you?" one of the young men wondered. "'Cause I was thinking of her myself, except I don't have enough money." "Yep, that's the one he bought," Will said. "In fact, Little Carl has named her Beauty." "What a lucky guy," the disappointed young man said. "But that's good for you, though, because it will help you when you go to court Lynn Taylor." The rest of the boys laughed because everyone knew that Little Carl wanted to be boyfriend and girlfriend with Lynn since they were children. One of the things everyone liked about Mr. Elliott's barn dances was he didn't allow alcoholic drinks. Fruit punch and fresh apple cider were the 2 drinks that were always available. There was also plenty of food because every Friday the women folk would bring their favorite dish and everyone would share in the meal together. The dance was going great and all the neighbors were enjoying themselves. The fiddlers and singers were on the stage entertaining the guests with various songs that had people square dancing and waltzing. Suddenly, in the middle of the dance floor, a big commotion caused everyone to stand back. Eric Martindale and Terry Tyler were facing each other, threatening to fight. You could see from the way both were swaying back and forth that they had obviously been drinking more than the fruit punch and apple cider. It was more likely some homemade grape wine. Mr. Elliott came over to where Will and the rest of his friends were standing. "Could some of you young fellas help get these 2 boys outside before they ruin our dance?" Little Carl and Will immediately took control as each of them gently yet firmly took the arm of the 2 potential combatants and escorted them out the barn door. The rest of the neighbors immediately went back to their fun as the disturbance quickly ended. Outside, little Carl suggested Eric and Terry go to their homes to get some sleep and sober up. Good idea, they both said as they stumbled off in opposite directions. Everyone knew that these two were good friends, and it was too much wine they had to drink that made them want to fight each other. After the ruckus settled down, Lynn Taylor came over to little Carl. "That was very brave of you, little Carl. I sure would like it if you came by my home sometime and gave me a ride in your new buckboard wagon." Little Carl just looked at her stunned, nodding his head up and down in agreement as she turned and walked back into the dance. The rest of the young men waited for little Carl to say something, but he just stood there and watched his beloved Lynn. Finally, Will poked him in the arm and woke little Carl from the trance he was in. "Guess what, guys?" Will playfully shouted. "Little Carl Baker has a girlfriend." Little Carl began chasing Will, yelling, "Do not!" as the two disappeared around the back of the barn. Farming was an occupation Will found very challenging and rewarding. There was nothing as exciting as seeing the tiny seed that was planted grow into a plant that could feed and nourish people. Even though he grew up on a farm, he never realized what a science farming really was. He learned that to ensure a maximum yield from the crops each year required careful planning and deciding what to grow in each season. If the same crop is grown on the same land over and over, the soil will be depleted of its nutrients. It is important for farmers to avoid a decrease in soil fertility by practicing crop rotation. So Henry and his family would plant different crops in a regular order, so that certain nutrients in the soil taken out by one crop were returned to the soil the following year by the next crop. He told his sons that crop rotation was practiced in ancient African, Roman, and Asian cultures. In 18th century Europe, they would practice a 4-year crop rotation of wheat, barley, turnips, and clover. Will's father knew a lot about farming, which explained why he was so successful. Planting season for this year was over, so Will prepared for his next visit to Ypsilanti. He was packing to leave when his mother, Kazar, came in. "So are you going to Ypsi for a few days, son?" "Yes, Mama," Will said. Kazar turned her back and began cleaning up the kitchen as Will continued to get ready. "You know, I was thinking about going with you this time," Kazar said, her back still turned. Excited, Will started to run over to her, but instead he calmly said, "That would be nice, Mama. I'm sure Uncle Sam and Aunt Margaret will be happy to see you." Kazar just walked over and reached under her bed, then pulled out her already packed suitcase. "Let's go," she said as she went out the door of their log home. Will and his mother reached Windsor late that afternoon, just in time to get to John Hill's ferry service and catch the last ferry to Detroit. Once the boat landed at the Detroit dock, they immediately headed to the Brush Street station and the Cookie car. Cookie was happy as ever to see his old friend. "Cookie, I would like you to meet my mother, Kazar." "Hello, Mrs. Perry, I've heard a lot about you," Cookie said, taking her hand and bowing. Cookie then began speaking in the Cherokee Indian language, surprising Kazar and shocking Will. He never knew Cookie could speak his mother's language, and watching those two talking back and forth was a beautiful sight. Cookie had learned to speak Cherokee from some of his boyhood friends who were members of the Cherokee Nation. The Cherokees inhabited not only the southern Appalachian Mountains where Cookie was from, but also the western Carolinas and eastern Tennessee, all the way to northern Georgia. Cookie insisted they stay with him in the Cookie car since he had never hired any full-time help since Will left. He hung up a blanket so Kazar would have a private area, and then he brought in a cot from another train car. Needless to say, Will's mother loved Cookie, and the two of them talked nonstop, sometimes in English and sometimes in Cherokee. Kazar even helped Cookie feed the workers and the passengers. Will learned later that they also had exchanged their secret recipe ideas. When they arrived in Ypsi, they said their goodbyes, and Kazar and Will headed for Uncle Sam and Aunt Margaret's. "Cookie is really a nice person and very wise for his age," Kazar said. "Yes," Will agreed. Kazar really enjoyed the few days she got to spend with her cousins, Margaret and Samuel. She was looking forward, however, to returning home because she really missed her husband. The train made its regular stop in Dearborn, where they picked up more passengers and farm produce. Cookie, Kazar, and Will stood on the train platform outside the Cookie car watching all the people in activity. A couple with their young son approached the three. "Excuse me," the man said, "can you tell me where I could find Mr. Cookie in his Cookie car?" "I'm Cookie. "This is my friend William, his mother, Mrs. Kazar Perry, and this is my cookie car," he said, pointing to the car behind him. "How may I help you?" "Hello, Mrs. Perry and Mr. Perry. My name is William Ford, and this is my wife Mary and our son Henry. We are taking the train into Detroit, and my son asked if he could visit your cookie car. He has heard a lot about it from different railroad men and wanted to see it for himself, if you don't mind." "Not at all," Cookie said. "Come with me, Henry. Will and I will show you around." Cookie and Will began giving the Ford family a tour of the renovated boxcar while Kazar remained on the platform watching all the people. "So how old are you, Henry?" Will asked. "I'm 8, sir," Henry replied. "You can call me Will. I'm only 10 years older than you, Henry. A few years ago I remember delivering a Christmas present for you when I worked at Mr. Levi Foster's livery stable in Amherstburg, Canada." "Oh, that was you who got caught in that big snowstorm? We heard about what happened," Mary Ford said. "Thank you for delivering that package. Henry really enjoyed the gift. It was a box full of toys and some tools that he uses to take clocks and watches apart, then put back together again, which he loves." "I sure do," Henry said, agreeing with his mother. After taking the Ford family on the tour of the cookie car, everyone boarded the train to complete their journey to Detroit. When Will returned home, the first thing he did was go to Little Carl's. Little Carl had been going to Malcolm McKay's to work with his new horse Beauty to train her to pull a wagon. Little Carl was one of the best at breaking a horse in the county. He said he would never try to break a horse, but he used a method of earning the horse's trust through a gentler means. When Will reached Little Carl's, he was waiting for him at the end of his lane. He climbed into the wagon. "How are you doing?" Little Carl asked. "I'm fine," Will answered. "Did you and Lynn ever go for a wagon ride?" "Not yet," Little Carl said, "but I have been over to her home for dinner with her parents and little brother. I have decided to wait until Beauty is trained enough to be harnessed to the wagon before we go for our ride." "Boy, when Lynn does go in your new wagon with your new horse pulling it, she will never forget that first ride," Will said, smiling. "That's what I'm hoping," Little Carl said. They finally pulled up to the corral at Mr. McKay's. Beauty was out near the center of the pasture, but soon as Little Carl whistled, she came running over to him at the fence as fast as she could. Even though it had only been a short time, you could already see a bond developing between the two. "The first few days I wanted Beauty and me to just get to know each other and to be comfortable," Little Carl said as he reached in his pocket and pulled out a cube of sugar for his horse. "I've been coming here talking to her, preparing for the next phase of our training. Today I brought a bridle to attempt riding her. If I'm able to get Beauty to accept me on her back, then it will be easier to get her to accept being harnessed." Just then they heard the screen door slam shut as Mr. McKay came outside and made his way over to the two of them. "Morning, boys," Mr. McKay said as he jumped on the fence rail beside the two. "Well, Little Carl, are you ready to saddle up Beauty and try to ride her?" "Sure am, Mr. McKay, but I'm going to do it without the saddle. I brought my bridle with me because I feel the less we have to put on Beauty's back, the more relaxed she will be." "Good thinking," Mr. McKay said. "A lot of people don't understand that regardless of their large size, a horse is a gentle and sensitive beast, and to be a good horseman you must recognize this. For example, every time a horse starts bucking, it doesn't mean they're angry or are trying to hurt someone. There could be many reasons they do it. A horse will buck when they're happy or even during play. Also, they will buck to release energy if they've been in their stall a long time and then let outside. Pain from a toothache or other medical problems can also cause them to buck. For an untrained horse like Beauty, having a saddle on her back for the first time will instinctively cause her to buck as a natural defense mechanism." "Interesting," Will said. "That makes sense." Will turned and watched as Little Carl sat on the top of the fence talking to Beauty gently as he attempted to slip on the bridle. "Easy, girl. Come on, let me put this around your neck," Little Carl begged as the big horse backed up and vigorously shook her head and stomped her foot. He pulled out another sugar cube and began bribing Beauty back to him. She tried to resist, but the temptation of the sweet treat was too much, and she began tentatively easing her way back to Little Carl. When she was close enough, he threw the bridle over her neck and was able to put it in place. His next challenge was to climb on her back. Luckily, at that moment, Beauty moved sideways against the fence, and Little Carl was able to jump on. You could see the surprise in Beauty's eyes as she stood frozen with her new owner sitting triumphantly on her. Mr. McKay and Will both watched the two motionless figures in what seemed like minutes, but was just seconds. Suddenly, Beauty did a pirouette, jumped almost 2 feet off the ground, and then seemed to click her hooves together. Caught by surprise, little Carl went flying, turned 360 degrees in the air, landing on his feet, but the impact threw him face first into the ground. He clambered back up, spitting grass and mud out of his mouth, while Will and Mr. McKay fell down laughing. "I guess I forgot to tell you a horse will also buck when someone is sitting on their back for the first time," Mr. McKay said. "Okay, Miss Big Shot, you think by bucking me off you can avoid this training. Well, it won't work," little Carl stuttered as he continued spitting out grass. That's the way the rest of the day went, with little Carl climbing back onto Beauty, then her bucking him off, then little Carl spitting out grass, and the two of them doing it all over again. On the ride home that afternoon, little Carl had to sit sideways in the wagon because his bottom was so sore. "Beauty's a stubborn little filly," little Carl said. The two friends laughed as Will continued, driving them down the dusty road home. The years went by, one blending into the other. Little Carl and Lynn were happily married now with children. He still had Beauty, who turned out to be one of the gentlest horses you would ever see. The children could get away with pulling her tail, and little Carl's baby would even crawl between Beauty's legs, while she always avoided stepping on him. So this was the farm life Will had returned to, a life that included friends, family, and fun.